Hey, what is up? My name is Justin and welcome back to my YouTube channel where I talk about tech, finance, and life. So if you've been struggling to get a job, pass the final round of the interviews, or even the first round for that matter, make sure to stick around for the rest of this video. I've actually been able to teach friends in the same exact situation, and now they work at some of the world's largest companies, such as Goldman Sachs, Bloomberg, and Amazon. And for myself, I'll be working at Amazon as a full-time software engineer this summer. So I know the challenges of making an impression to your interviewer and actually getting a full-time offer. So make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell, and let's get started. So let's start at just the very fundamentals, because I feel like this is actually where so many people make a mistake. The very first thing that I want to address is just the body language and your voice. I find that so many people don't even notice these smaller things during an interview, such as using filler words like ums and likes, whether in person or virtually, looking at the other person in the eye, and even small things, just like smiling. These things make a huge difference, and I'll actually give a small example. Here's how I used to sound like before I actually knew these tips. Hi, my name's Justin. I'm currently a senior in college, studying computer science, and I do software engineering. Versus caring about my body language and voice, I say something more similar to this now. Hi, my name is Justin. I'm a senior in college, studying computer science, and I'm a software engineer. Even through these small things like smiling, you get a bit more inflection out of your voice, you sound a lot more confident, and you sound much more in control of the entire process. The other thing I find is that during an interview, a lot of people sort of just fall into automatic mode. You're not really thinking, you're just sort of answering the first thing that comes to your head. But feel free to take some time out and just tell them, hey, that's a really good question. Do you mind if I take a moment to think about that? Or actually, this one's a favorite too. Do you mind if I just take a moment to jot down some notes and organize my thoughts? The point of this is so that you and the interviewer feels like you are more confident and more in control throughout the interview versus not knowing how to respond and just freezing up, which can come off as a bit unprofessional or even just create a small subconscious bias. The very next thing that I find people making a big mistake on is not understanding how questions get abstracted out and then giving structure to their answer. So first of all, let's first talk about the abstraction part. What do I mean by abstraction? So whenever an interviewer asks you a question, there's usually some sort of abstracted layer on top of it. For example, a very popular question would be, how do you deal with conflict from a team member? And there are actually a bunch of other questions similar to this, such as, how would you deal with conflict from your boss? How would you deal with conflict from a manager? How would you deal with conflict from a customer? And all this sort of falls into conflict resolution. And so the idea is that once you have an idea of the types of questions, you should be able to abstract them out to one level higher, which is just, in this case, again, conflict resolution. And then once you're able to abstract it out, you are now actually able to come up with pre-prepared answers for anything that falls within these categories. But saying that, you don't want to just ramble on with an answer. You actually want to give structure to your answer. You want to usually bullet 2 to 3 main points before you actually move on. So what do I mean by that? For example, if I get asked about team conflict, I usually answer it like this. So I've actually never been in a situation with a teammate where I had any conflict, but if I was, I think there are 3 main steps that I would take in order to resolve it. I think the first one is just being empathetic to where they are coming from. I want to make sure that I understand their viewpoint. So the second thing that I would do is actually compromise. After I understand where they're coming from, I want to make sure that we can reach some sort of middle ground between us. And finally, the last thing that I would do is make sure I just follow through with whatever compromise we come up with. Since I want to make sure that, what we compromise on isn't just words, but we actually put that into action. So hopefully you can see there's actually some pretty good pros to, that answering structure, which is it keeps you concise, it keeps you from rambling, and it gives you organization for you and the interviewer. Because now what the interviewer knows when they're taking notes, are able to just jot down empathetic, compromise, and following through, and that makes much more of a stronger point in their head versus just if you had a mixed paragraph of answers and you just rambled on. I think the very next thing is to want to be able to tell a good story and actually be specific to industry. So what do I mean by this? I have a friend who was interviewing for CRM roles or customer relationship management roles. And essentially what ended up happening is that she didn't have a lot of good success initially. She was getting to all these final rounds, but constantly being rejected. And so I thought that there had to be something wrong. And so I ended up doing a mock interview with her and I was correct. So she was actually a really good speaker, first thing that I want to note. But the problem was she wasn't being specific. For example, when I asked her about, oh, tell me a bit about what you did at your previous company, she would explain, yeah, so at my previous company, I worked as a product manager who essentially helped coordinate the UI and the engineering team. I also worked with the business development part of the company where I came up with high-level strategy in order to help the company generate more revenue. Now, as you can see, that's not actually a bad answer. In fact, it's pretty solid. But the problem is that there's no specifics. You become another generic interviewee who probably has another, similar profile to another candidate. You've refined her answer to be a bit more specific and actually give knowledge to her industry. So we got her to refine it to something more similar to, so at my previous company, I worked as a product manager where I helped coordinate between the engineering and the UI team. I also helped create business strategies with the business development part of the company. And these things included looking at our customer retention rate, looking at what our monthly retention rate per user was, trying to manage our income flow, and helping to do A/B testing with our customer testing group in order to make sure that our product was well validated and tested with customers in the field. Hopefully it is obvious to see, while both of them are actually great answers, one of them is able to give a bit more specific to what they were actually doing. And this is what I mean by telling a good story and being specific. At the end of the day, the interview is supposed to see how are you going to operate in the new company? How did you previously operate in a team? And what is the knowledge that you're bringing back on? If you are not able to give any specifics as to what you previously did or what you know, then the interviewer really would have no way to differentiate you. So one warning with this is you do want to make sure to avoid too much jargon. You don't want to, start talking about so much technical details that no one knows what you're talking about. But overall, you hopefully get the gist. Finally, the very last part is making sure that you leave that final impression. To give you an idea of what happens after the interview, at least at big companies, your interviewer needs to circle a strong no, yes, or strong yes on a sheet of paper in order to tell the rest of the company on whether or not they think that you're a good hire or not. And you really want to be focusing on trying to get them to move that yes to a strong yes. And so this might be a bit psychoanalytical here, but here's my thought process. At the end of the interviewer is a bit tired, it's tiring for both parties involved. And they will usually ask, so do you have any questions you want to ask me? And I find that most people waste this opportunity. They just say, can you tell me a bit more about your companies? Which, in my opinion, you're going to get such a brain-dead, automatic response. You have to imagine that is such an automatic response where most people do not even have to think in order to discuss about their company. Instead, I personally like to ask, and feel free to modify and come up with ones by yourself, by the way, questions that actually try to provoke them into thinking a bit more, such as questions that ask them for any type of advice or actually have them do a reflection. For example, the first question that I really like to ask is, if I or a new employee was to join the company, is there a top 3 advice that you would give them in order to best succeed? Or the second one I like to ask, especially if the person is a bit more senior who's interviewing me, is there anything about how the company operates or its value that has made you stay at this company for so long? So the idea behind these sorts of questions and why I like to ask these questions at the end of the interview is because it forces them to think a bit more. You won't get such a brain-dead automatic response. Instead, they need to have a bit more of a deeper thought process, and potentially when they're circling that piece of paper, you have a bit more of a stronger impression, especially since they had just come off of giving you advice. But the main idea that I hope that you get from this is don't waste even a second in the behavioral interview. Every part of it is supposed to have you try to get them to imagine how you would be like at their company. Anyways, that's it for this video. If you liked it, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell. And leave a comment down below if you've had any trouble with behavioral interviews in the past, if you have any specific questions, or even what else would you like to see from this channel. Anyways, see y'all next time, and maybe check out some other videos on my channel. Bye.